The British hatred of Donald Trump transcends mere politics and enters the realm of the physiological, a full-body revulsion so complete that it could serve as the basis for a new national unity, perhaps the only thing since the death of Diana that has united the kingdom in a single emotion, though this time it's nausea rather than grief. Trump doesn't just offend British political sensibilities, he offends their aesthetic ones, their social ones, their linguistic ones, and most unforgivably, their sense of themselves as sophisticated people who would never, ever be so vulgar as to gold-plate a toilet or put their name in giant letters on a building. He is, in every possible way, what the British fear they look like to the French. To understand the depth of this revulsion, you must understand that Trump violates every single principle of British social conduct, starting with the cardinal sin. He refuses to deprecate himself. In Britain, the first rule of discourse is that you must immediately undermine anything you've achieved, dismiss any compliment you've received, and present your successes as happy accidents you're rather embarrassed about. Trump, by contrast, claims to be the best at things he's demonstrably terrible at, takes credit for achievements that preceded his birth, and describes his failures as successes so tremendous that ordinary people can't perceive them. This isn't just foreign to the British sensibility, it's an assault upon it, like serving a full English breakfast without beans, or suggesting that cricket might benefit from being interesting. The British have developed over centuries an elaborate system of indirection where saying what you mean is considered a form of mental illness. Quite good means excellent, a bit of a problem means catastrophe, I might suggest means do this immediately, or you're fired. Trump, meanwhile, speaks in a language that makes the average British person feel like they're being assaulted with a ham. Everything is tremendous or disaster, the best or the worst, with no gradations, no subtlety, no acknowledgement that the universe might contain complexities that can't be captured in a four-word sentence containing two superlatives and his own name. The class issue is particularly excruciating. Trump represents new money at its most grotesque, not just wealthy but desperate to ensure you know it, not just rich but rich in the exact way that makes British people reach for the smelling salts. The British upper classes have spent centuries perfecting the art of having money while pretending they don't, driving ancient Land Rovers, wearing moth-eaten jumpers, and living in drafty houses that are falling apart in just the right way. Trump gold-plates everything, puts his name on stakes, and builds towers that look like what would happen if Liberace were asked to design a suppository. He's what the British imagine Russian oligarchs to be, except without the excuse of being foreign. Even Boris Johnson, Britain's attempt at producing its own Trump, couldn't achieve Trump's level of vulgarity despite his best efforts. Johnson at least knew Latin, could quote Homer badly, and understood that his buffoonery needed to be filtered through enough Etonian polish to remain technically acceptable at dinner parties. He was a fraud, certainly, but a British fraud, which meant he knew enough to be embarrassed occasionally. Trump wouldn't know embarrassment if it walked up and grabbed him by the pussy, to use his own charming vernacular. The British relationship with irony is perhaps where Trump causes the most distress. In Britain, irony isn't a literary device, it's a survival mechanism, a way of existing in a country where sincerity is considered a form of assault. Everything must be couched in layers of meaning, nothing can be taken entirely at face value, and the ability to deploy and detect irony is considered proof of consciousness. Trump has no irony. He says what he means if you can call it meaning, and means what he says if you can call it saying. When he declares himself a stable genius, he's not being ironic. When he suggests injecting bleach to cure COVID, he's not joking. He exists in a post-ironic state that makes British people feel like their entire civilization is under attack, which, to be fair, it is. The physical presentation is another source of profound discomfort. The British prefer their leaders to look slightly apologetic about existing, as if they're terribly sorry to be taking up space, but someone has to run the country and they suppose it might as well be them. Trump stands like he's trying to occupy as much space as possible, speaks with his hands like he's catching invisible hamburgers, and has a tan that suggests he's either dying of liver failure or has been colored in by a child with a limited crayon selection. His hair alone, that architectural marvel of denial and hairspray, violates at least 6 unwritten British laws about not drawing attention to one's attempts to hide physical decline. When Trump met the Queen, it was like watching a nature documentary about incompatible species. She deployed her weapons of controlled minimalism, speaking perhaps 12 words total, while he word vomited about real estate and his mother being Scottish, apparently unaware that claiming Scottish heritage to the English monarch is like claiming you're related to the burglar to the homeowner. He walked in front of her, touched her back, and generally behaved like someone who'd learned about royalty from a McDonald's crown. The British watched in horror, not because they're monarchists necessarily, but because he was doing being British wrong, and in front of their manager. The language issue deserves special attention. Trump speaks English the way a dog walks on its hind legs. It's clearly unnatural, you're amazed it happens at all, and you rather wish it would stop. His vocabulary appears to consist of approximately 200 words, 50 of which are tremendous, and he deploys them with the syntactic sophistication of someone who learned English from television commercials. The British, who treat their language like a beloved pet that must be groomed and exercised regularly, watch Trump communicate and feel actual physical pain. It's not just that he's inarticulate, it's that he's inarticulate with confidence, like someone playing a violin with a hammer and expecting applause. The British suspicion of enthusiasm also plays a role. In Britain, being too excited about anything except football or queuing is considered a character flaw. Trump is enthusiastic about everything, especially himself. He doesn't just support policies, he declares them the greatest in history. He doesn't just dislike opponents, they're the worst humans ever born. This emotional incontinence makes British people deeply uncomfortable, like watching someone have feelings in public without the decency to pretend they're not. There's also the small matter of Trump representing everything the British tell themselves they're not. When British people want to feel sophisticated, they compare themselves to Americans, and Trump is the American they're thinking of, loud, ignorant, convinced that money equals class, unable to locate Europe on a map, but certain it needs his opinion. He's the validation of every British prejudice about Americans, the living embodiment of why they spell colour with a U and pronounce aluminium with an extra syllable. He makes them feel justified in their cultural snobbery, which would be pleasant if it weren't so terrifying that he controlled nuclear weapons. What's particularly galling is that Trump claims British heritage whenever it suits him. His mother was Scottish, his properties in Scotland and Ireland make him practically native. He understands Brexit better than the British. This is like someone claiming to be a chef because they once ate a sandwich. The British have spent centuries developing their culture of repression, their elaborate systems of not saying things, their ability to convey murder through politeness, and here comes Trump, claiming connection while violating every principle they hold dear. It's cultural appropriation of the most offensive kind, the appropriation of a culture by someone who fundamentally doesn't understand that it exists. Even Nigel Farage, who politically aligns with Trump and has prostrated himself before him repeatedly, looks physically uncomfortable in his presence, like a man who's made a deal with a devil who has no taste. The British right wing wanted American conservative support, but they wanted it from someone who could at least pretend to have read a book. They wanted Reagan, or at minimum someone who could locate Wales on a map. Instead they got Trump, and even their opportunism couldn't overcome their aesthetic revulsion. The COVID response highlighted everything. While Britain was doing keep calm and carry on, while dying in enormous numbers but quietly, Trump was suggesting injecting disinfectant and promoting miracle cures he'd heard about from someone who'd heard about them from someone. The British approach to crisis is to pretend it's not happening while making darkly humorous jokes about it. Trump's approach was to deny it was happening while loudly claiming he'd solved it. Both responses were catastrophic, but the British at least had the decency to be catastrophic with style. What Trump represents to Britain is the fear that underneath all their carefully constructed sophistication, they might actually be more like him than they'd care to admit. After all, they voted for Brexit, their own act of self-destructive nationalism. They have their own tabloid culture that makes Fox News look restrained. They have their own problems with racism, inequality, and delusion. Trump is like a funhouse mirror, reflecting back their worst qualities, without the ameliorating coating of British manners and self-deprecation. The British don't just hate Trump, they need to hate Trump, because hating Trump is how they reassure themselves that they're not American, not vulgar, not the kind of people who would ever be so gauche as to say what they actually think, or so crude as to gold-plate anything. He's their negative definition, the thing they point to when explaining what they're not. In despising Trump, Britain achieves something it rarely manages, a moment of genuine national unity. Everyone from Glasgow to Dover joined in the shared conviction that whatever their differences, at least they're not that. And perhaps that's Trump's greatest service to Anglo-American relations. He's given the British something they've always wanted but could never quite articulate: definitive proof that they really are superior to Americans, or at least to one American who happens to have been president twice. It's not much of an achievement, but in a nation that's lost an empire and hasn't found a role, feeling superior to Donald Trump is at least something. Rather like Trump himself, it's simultaneously too much and nowhere near enough.